Hey, welcome to the Explainer. So today, we're going to tackle an organization we've all heard of, right? The World Health Organization. But what it really does and how much power it actually has, well, that's a whole other story.
So, let me ask you this. When a pandemic hits, who's really in charge? I mean, who's calling the shots? The obvious answer is the WHO, isn't it? But, the real story of who's holding the reins, it's a lot messier than you might think.
Okay, so to really get the who, you've got to go right back to the beginning. We need to look at its core mission, which honestly was super ambitious, almost revolutionary for its time. This is really the why behind the whole operation.
And you really have to pay attention to the words here. I mean, think about it. Back in 1948, this was a wild idea. They said health isn't just, not having a cold. It's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. That completely changed the game. It basically established health as a fundamental human right. And that one idea, it's the foundation for everything the WHO does.
And this core idea, it wasn't just talk. It led to some amazing wins. You see it founded in 48. Then by 78, they're pushing this health for all idea. But the big one, the one that really showed what was possible, was 1980. The WHO led the charge that completely eradicated smallpox. Just think about that. The only human disease we've ever completely wiped off the face of the earth. That's what global cooperation can do. And of course that work continues today, like with this new pandemic agreement they're trying to hammer out.
So, that's the big, inspiring goal. Pretty cool, right? But how does a massive organization like this actually work day to day? Let's kind of pop the hood and see what the machinery looks like inside.
Okay, now this is probably the most important thing to understand. The WHO is not some kind of global health police that tells countries what to do. It's the other way around. It's a member state-led organization. See that top box, the World Health Assembly? That's everybody, all 194 countries. They make the big decisions. They set the policies, they approve the budget. The other parts, like the executive board and the staff, their job is basically to carry out the orders that the countries have already agreed on. So remember that. The countries themselves are in the driver's seat.
All right, so if the countries are in charge, that brings up another really important question, right? To understand what the WHO can and can't do, we have to look at the most critical piece of the puzzle, where the money comes from.
So the WHO's funding basically comes in two flavors. On one hand, you've got assessed contributions. Just think of these like your mandatory HOA fees or membership dues. Every country has to chip in an amount based on how big and wealthy it is. This is the good stuff. It's stable, it's flexible, it keeps the lights on. But then you have the voluntary contributions. This is extra cash that countries or big foundations donate. Sounds great, right? But here's the catch. A lot of this money comes with strings attached. It's often earmarked, which means the donor says you can only use this money for this specific thing.
So you might be wondering what that split looks like. Well, get ready for this because it's pretty wild. Less than 20% of the WHO's budget, less than a fifth, comes from those stable, predictable membership dues. That means over 80% is voluntary money. Let that sink in. The vast majority of its budget is basically optional funding that often has those strings attached. It's a huge deal.
And this right here, this is the core problem, the central paradox of the WHO. It's got this huge global mission, protect the health of every single person on the planet. But it absolutely does not have a global budget to do that job. Because so much of the money is earmarked, the WHO can't just say, okay, this crisis over here is the most urgent, let's send money there. Instead, it has to send the money where the donors told it to go. And that creates this massive gap between what it's supposed to do and what it's funded to do.
This whole funding situation isn't just about spreadsheets and budgets. It's way bigger than that. It actually opens the door for all kinds of intense political and business pressures. To see what I mean, let's look at a perfect example that's happening right now: the super high-stakes negotiations for a new global pandemic agreement.
Okay, so right at the center of this new agreement is a concept called the PABS system. It stands for Pathogen, Access, and Benefit Sharing. And in plain English, it's basically the world's attempt to make sure what happened with COVID-19 doesn't happen again. It's a two-part deal. Access means countries have to quickly share samples and data about new viruses. Benefit sharing means that in return, those same countries get a fair shot at the vaccines and medicines that are created from that data. Simple idea, right?
Well, not so simple in practice. The whole thing hinges on getting that balance right. Everybody agrees on the first part. Of course, scientists need quick access to data to make vaccines. No debate there. But the second part, guaranteeing that the benefits, the actual vaccines and drugs, get shared fairly, oh boy, that is where there's a huge disagreement. And it's where these negotiations have gotten really, really stuck.
So on one side, you have many developing nations.
This quote here from Zimbabwe, speaking for the African countries, sums it up perfectly. They're basically saying, look, we've been here before. Just hoping that companies and countries will voluntarily share doesn't work when a crisis hits, it fails. For them, the only way forward is to make these benefit-sharing rules ironclad, legally binding, and actually enforceable, not just a nice-to-have suggestion.
But then, on the other side of the table, you have a different view. Some wealthier nations, along with their big pharmaceutical companies, are pushing for a more voluntary system. They argue that if you make these rules mandatory, you could actually scare away investment and slow down innovation. And right there, in that one disagreement, you see the tightrope the WHO is always walking, trying to balance the needs of global public health against very powerful business and national interests.
Okay, so we've looked at the mission, the structure, the money, the politics. We've peeled back all these layers. So what's the bottom line here? What's the final verdict on the WHO's role?
I think it really boils down to this. The WHO is the only organization on the planet that has the job, the official mandate, to be our global health guardian. There's no one else. But, and this is a huge but, its power is totally limited by the money and the politics of its own members. It can't do more than what the countries of the world allow it to. It's not some all-powerful global government. It's more like a mirror, reflecting just how much we're willing to cooperate. And that really leaves us with the giant, critical question for the future. We know the threats are getting bigger, right? More pandemics, climate change impacting health. It's a lot. So the real challenge is, can a world full of competing countries and companies actually come together and agree to build and empower the global health guardian we so clearly need? The answer to that question will pretty much define the future of our collective health. Thanks for tuning in.